You got to be able to have a platform that allows you not only to look at the technical aspect of what you're doing, but also reason upon the business aspect of it.
David Mann, so good to have
Yes.
you. So good to see you again.
It's great to be on, Nick. It's good to see you too.
All right, how you been?
Been awesome. Lots been happening since the last time we've talked, and I've actually got some big news this weekend. My son's getting married, so we're yeah. So I'll
Oh
be going.
yeah,
Oh no! Right after, we add to the family. So I'll be in a good mood.
that is like so great. So happy about that. Congratulations. That is like really just so great.
Yeah.
It's and I truly do mean that because like my wife and I, we have two kids and we're in their 30s, early 30s, and so we're kind of waiting for them, to kind of like partner up, but
Yeah.
so anyway, I know the joy you're
Yes.
experiencing. So
Yes.
as
Can't wait.
congrats.
Thank you.
Great. So anyway, so NetBrain. One thing before we start, so NetBrain was acquired, and it was like a quiet acquisition, right?
Right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that because it was also big too, acquisition. So
Yeah. Very much so.
yeah. So why don't we
Yeah.
talk about that? And then I want to dive into like some talking points.
Okay. All right. No. Yeah. That sounds great. So last July, big news that we had at NetBrain with Blackstone making the acquisition, and also with the transition because LP or founder and CEO at the time, he founded the company from the ground up and spent a tremendous amount of time there at NetBrain, and so now transitioning over to the board, we've got a new CEO, Bernadette Nixon, that was brought in. She's been great to work with. She's got a tremendous background and experience, and just the resources that Blackstone is bringing to NetBrain are just phenomenal. And just looking at the growth aspect. So this was an investment in which they truly believed in the product.
Yeah.
They didn't think that the product needs to be combined with something else in order to be a full solution. It was good on its own, and so we're really looking forward to just scaling what we do, and it's an exciting time to be here.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Well, congratulations to you and the entire NetBrain, company, as well. And so actually looking forward to meeting Bernadette, and I think she's actually planning on coming to the summit.
She
So
is.
yeah,
Yep.
so I'll get to see her then later there. Okay. So I want to start with your career journey, David. Make sure everybody gets to know you. Within the community. So we spent a lot of years living at the intersection of networking, automation, and really operations. So can you walk us through some of the key, I guess, points of your journey, and what led you to NetBrain?
Definitely. So I started my career at IBM in the hardware space. And so I spent some time there. And it's actually the son that I was just telling you about is getting married this weekend. When he was born and we were in the hospital, that's when I started like reading network books. And I just totally consumed it. While we were waiting for him to come home, I read the
Mm.
entire CCNA book. I went and
Uh,
took the test. I got involved in networking, and just started taking certifications and building my own labs, et cetera. And then I actually got into the networking field, transition from hardware into networking itself. So I spent a lot of years over at Tyco International, where
yeah.
we were just building large enterprise environments, doing a ton of mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, you name it. We were doing that in that space. And I also got a chance to see there how networking was not just about the enterprise, but it was also about the product, right? We use
Mm.
networking heavily in a product that, we sold back to the customers in the fire and security space. And so from there, I went, and that's where I first got introduced to NetBrain, actually, when I was with Tyco. And then from there, I went off to McGraw-Hill, spending so much time doing the acquisitions, mergers, and divestitures, and staying with the large organization. When I went to McGraw Hill, they had just finished the divestiture from S&P Global, and so I said, I spent 10 years on the other side. What's it like to be a part of the company that got split off? It's almost like working for a startup, a 100-year-old startup,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so that was pretty exciting. And so there we actually went through the journey of being your traditional book publishing education company to becoming a software company. And
Yeah.
to support a network for a logistics book company is very different than supporting the network and the enterprise for a software company. So we went through that journey, and that's where I brought NetBrain in at McGraw-Hill and helped us just ensure that we were able to keep up the pace, build an automation strategy, and build efficiencies through that. You may know that at that time, NetBrain was going through a journey of their own, right? From focusing on observability and visibility into automation space and beyond during that time. And so that really helped us, when I was there.
Yeah. Awesome. That's like so great that how you got to NetBrain was really through the use of the product,
That's right.
and on the customer side of things. And, there's a few folks that I know that have kind of made that journey, both on the supplier and the consumer side, and they are just so much more in tune, I think, to the company and the product, and the value prop, that it offers, and how it fits within kind of the life cycle. In this particular case, is life cycle management, of the infrastructure. But that's a really great set and a really great experience and journey to kind of go through. I think everyone that I've seen that does that, has something special, about them. So it's always good to kind of like, I think, be on both sides, of the transaction. So, okay, great. Let's dive in. All right. So,
Okay.
no, actually, no, because you kind of just went up to NetBrain. You didn't say what you're doing at NetBrain.
Yeah. So
So,
so then there was another stop that I had. I was at a large biotech organization, CSL, where I worked there. I had NetBrain there as well. And so I decided to make the move over to the other side, into the vendor side. And so I came into NetBrain, and I run global services for NetBrain. And so what our global services is that when our customers get our product, we don't leave them on an island. We don't leave them on their own. We're with them shoulder to shoulder every step of the way, and they can always lean upon the automation experts and the AI experts that we have within our organization. And so we have something that's called Jumpstart, where we help you get up and running. We've got an automation maturity service where we help you along the maturity path. That helps you with things like governance, guardrails. We help you with process, because process is a big deal in being successful in gaining the efficiencies utilizing AI. And then and so those are the services, and we lead those. I lead those globally, and it's interesting. The same teams that were helping and supporting me when I was a customer, now I'm leading here at NetBrain, so it's pretty cool.
yeah, that is cool. It kind of goes into that discussion. You kind of the kind of service that needs to be delivered. So
Exactly,
that all
exactly.
kind of works. All right. Okay, let's kind of dive in a little bit. Because I think we're kind of going in the industry from kind of visibility into now reasoning, right? So it's like the whole
Right.
thing about observability is that, can you observe around a particular issue, to extract information so that you can try to understand what's going on, into like more like, okay, well, why don't we have AI kind of do that,
Mhm.
and then so now we have, I wouldn't say living, but we have more reasoning that's now applied to the infrastructure. So NetBrain particularly has been focused on kind of network intent, the whole automation piece, and kind of dynamic mapping. So how do you see your platform now evolving as networks kind of shift from these observability tools into like systems that actually start to reason, and more importantly than just reason, but also just start to take action on
Yep.
behalf of the operations team?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. You know, reasoning is important because, our networks are getting um more complicated,
Mhm.
and our networks are getting more critical. The scope of networks are expanding. The amount of devices that are on networks are growing. I remember, at my last enterprise networking job, um, we had, into the millions of devices that were on the network. That's something, that's grown over the years. The ratio of people to network devices has just, tremendously grown. And so that complication has grown. The other thing too is like the knowledge of networking, of individuals that understand and know how networking works, et cetera, is not growing at that pace. And so what we've seen is that the tools that you use have to be able to reason so that you can take the knowledge of, level 3 engineers, the knowledge of your senior level experts built right into the product. And you also have to ensure that it's context aware, meaning, one organization may have one way to troubleshoot BGP or to troubleshoot, OSPF or whatever it is, where another organization may have another way to troubleshoot that because of what their business requirements are and what their business needs are. And so you got to be able to have a platform that allows you not only to look at the technical aspect of what you're doing, but also reason upon the business aspect of it and to understand what those guardrails have to be so that you're meeting what must be true about your environment, in the platform.
Yeah, that's a good point. The context is like extremely important. Just to know, okay, this is a financial trading desk, and you have kind of a multicast operation. That needs to be highly tuned so that you distribute that information, at a really tight latency. And so that's a context, right? And so whatever the reasoning is, needs to be aware of that, and needs to act accordingly. So yeah, I think that's really important. So it's not just kind of the use of AI in the reasoning, but it's also that the systems have got to also kind of understand the context in which they're operating. All right, so okay, all right, great. So let's take this around, if we think about kind of traditional tools,
Mhm.
and how some of them don't particularly scale and fail, especially within AI driven operations. So we're really just talking about the operational aspect of it. So the knocks, and the socks. So especially around the ONU community, what we hear a lot is that traditional tools, obviously they can detect, issues, but they really can't reason, right? By
Right.
definition, because they weren't designed for that,
Right.
no, so they can't reason and they can't act autonomously. So where do you maybe see the biggest gaps today, and how does NetBrain address them? Right?
Yeah. I guess it starts with, why you built the network. What's the goal of the network? In the NetBrain world, we call that the intent. And we say you built the network in order to ensure that the network's meeting, what must be true about your environment in order to run your business. And so you can actually make a direct correlation between your business requirements with technical behavior that's happening underneath the covers. And so being able to do that allows you to do a number of things. It allows you to be able to solve the issue or the impact faster, right? If you know what the impact is, it allows you to prioritize that impact as well. What is it that we need to address first?
Mhm.
It allows you to do that. And so that's what that intent is what NetBrain allows. So for example, let's say that there's some business process that relies heavily upon some kind of network flow or what have you. We can define various aspects of that process, whether it has to do with routes, whether it has to do with paths, whether it has to do with um, latency, whatever the fingerprint is of what must be good for that business process, we can put that into what we call a network intent and say, check for this. And if you're checking for this throughout 24 hours throughout the day, well, guess what? It's also the same things you should be checking for when you're running changes. And so if I'm doing changes, right, then I need to make sure that what must be true about my environment is being checked before I do that change,
Yeah.
during the change, and after the change. And
Yeah.
all of those things that must be true, that grows over time as you learn more about your environment, as your application requirements change, as your business changes. And so
Yeah.
we look at it and say, if my business changes, I want to put that into my platform because that's what I'm looking for. And then all the
Yeah.
technical capabilities underneath that enable that, then the platform will go ahead and tell you what's happening beneath that are causing that business change or a business
Yeah.
impact.
So context and intent,
Yeah.
kind of two important parts of the kind of the automation, journey, within for the use of NetBrain. Okay, I think those are excellent points. There's I think there's one thing that's super important, now as we kind of think of automation. So we're kind of like moving. So you guys have really kind of thought, through the automation piece, like really well. It's like even just thinking about those 2 points around context, and intent, pieces that as kind of guardrails, for how automation kind of works. We're kind of moving into a new world, now with agentic operations. So it's kind of agentic AI kind of applied to network operations, and important topic within the community now, and especially like there's a good amount of momentum that we see that within the Yona community of within Knox and also SOX having agents, um, mostly kind of co-pilots, not full-blown agents yet, but co-pilots. But they want to move towards agents that are kind of handling these tier one and tier two operations that you were just alluding to. So that's kind of incident response, right? It's change management, it's troubleshooting, it's like those kinds of kind of block and tackling activities that happen in operations.
Yeah.
So I guess what role does NetBrain play in enabling kind of no human interaction there? Or so in
Yeah.
those operations, and where maybe where are we still not ready
Yeah.
for those, right?
That,
So the human in the loop is an important part of that. It's like that's where the trust, when you don't have trust, you want to make sure if there's a human in the loop. And you take the human out of the loop when you gain trust. So anyway, so where's NetBrain kind of play, in kind of the agentic AI ops?
yeah. So we look at, the agent having the goal and building the goal, the agent works toward that goal. And so
Mhm.
throughout the with our customers, as I mentioned, I lead global services for NetBrain. So with our customers, that's one of the things that we help them to consistently build is looking at this product and building what the goals are and then constantly working on that, because as you build those goals and as you constantly refine those goals, then you're getting more and more accurate to being able to have that true agentic NetOps experience. Now within our product, when we find a root cause, and then when the agent says, presents what the possible solution is to that root cause, we do require a human to be on the loop in order to actually say, yes, go ahead and, remediate that problem. Or yes, we agree with that. Go ahead and remediate that problem. We have a concept of what's called standard changes within the platform. Those standard changes are pre-approved changes, and it's based on the standards that are in the organization. And what we can do with our platform is we can learn what your current standards are. We can detect what those current standards are, and we can detect when those current standards aren't being applied as well. And then we present that to the customer, and they can say, hey, we're noticing that, you've got this primary and secondary relationship here. We're seeing that you wanted to apply these route maps because you built it on the primary, because we know it's the primary because we're looking at the HSRP. We see what the metrics are on there, so we know which one's primary. But we're also seeing that the secondary, it even though you built these maps out, you didn't apply it to the routing protocol. We're thinking that there's an issue here, and this is a standard that's missed. Do you agree? And they're like, oh yeah, you know what? That is, because if it failed over, they'd be a problem. And so that's how we're proactive in identifying that, and then allowing the human to say, yes, go ahead and apply that to fix that standard. So that's one area in which we're helping resolve that problem as well.
Okay, so it's almost like kind of taking run books that have already been established, for some period of time, and it's almost like training the agents on the run books and keeping the human in the loop as the all right. So don't allow it to do things that um, where you're not quite sure or trust it yet. I guess kind of like the way I'm thinking. That's kind of like how I'm thinking about it. I'm not sure if that's what you were getting at, David, but
Yeah, being able to understand, yeah, exactly. And so being able to understand what those standards are, discovering what those standards are, and then delivering that. Now, in some instances, it's, that kind of, knowledge is utilized in compliance. um, there may be compliance rules that the organization has to abide by. For instance, I just got off right before this. I just got off a call with a CISO of a major organization that these are the exact reasons why they're looking at NetBrain. The amount of CISOs that I talk to now that are looking at the integrations, because old school methods of having an incident, responding to that incident, needing to collect information from other teams like the network team on whether it's ports, devices, movement throughout the network, traffic flow, whatever it is, tossing that over to Cube, tickets going back and forth. Those days are over. And so what the CISOs are looking at is, how can I ingest, how can I utilize the data, the knowledge, the topology, that NetBrain has, the intelligence that NetBrain has, so we can incorporate that right into our incident response process. And those incident response processes are parts of the guardrails that are placed for AI to use. And so when what we call knowledge documents, what some may call skills that are built into the platform, we can take your business process, your incident response process, your SOPs, et cetera, and guide the agent to follow along those processes, so that when there is an integration with a ServiceNow or whomever, an ITSM platform, and we learn of the incident, we'll follow that process, through automation.
yeah. Okay. All right. Very good. Well, it is great that, you can kind of build upon what's already been kind of established in these particular workflows, automate as much as you can until you come to decision points where you need to have somebody kind of having the oversight there. So,
Right.
okay, very great. I want to kind of shift this a little bit, into kind of like network design, because, and this is an area where it depends on what part of a network you're kind of thinking about, but let's first go broader. We might have to kind of drill down a little bit, but like in essence, kind of like what breaks first is really kind of like the question. So, design networks for AI workloads. So there's kind of like two things that are going on. One is that you kind of look at like Anthropic's month of February, where they kind of generated $8 billion in a month, right? And the vast majority of that was really from enterprise dev teams. And so what's been occurring, and we've seen this within our community, is that we've many in the large enterprise that basically, I wouldn't say halted, but they're reviewing all of their kind of SaaS commitments and how much they're spending, with them, and looking at the number of licenses they have and so forth. Because the SaaS providers have been really good in increasing their fees, on their licensing fees over a period of time. So there was already angst there in the marketplace, and so some were got development teams to say, okay, do we really need to use this particular SaaS platform? Can we build something on our own? And so there were many, especially in the financials, that started to move down that road. And then AI came along, and especially Claude, and its code writing tools, and that just accelerated it. It was just boom, and that's why we have Sassapalooza kind of going on right now. So in that regard, there's a lot of use of AI, but it's use of AI to write code to replace what's already been there. And those I don't kind of view as maybe AI workloads, but there are other applications. There are companies, especially in the financials, the pharmaceuticals, transportation, and so forth, that actually have built AI infrastructure. And so in there, the data center in particular, traffic patterns have fundamentally changed. Latency requirements have changed. Bandwidth requirements, have only increased. What we do in networking has changed. It's not just a connectivity tool, but it's also a scheduling tool, a security, tool. So there are lots of things that we're now, requiring the network to actually do. So I think what I'm trying to get at, so that's there. In the wide area, agentic really hasn't kind of manifested itself into changing kind of network behavior yet. We know it's coming, but you can imagine too on those the same kinds of attributes will occur. So I think when there's a real change in kind of behavior patterns of the network, that's what I mean around kind of they're addressing kind of the workloads of AI. So I guess what I'm trying to get at, as AI workloads reshape both traffic patterns, bandwidth requirements, latency requirements, kind of what breaks first, in these enterprise networks, and how should teams start to think about design and the operations for this new era that we're in. So we're only in the very beginning of this, but we know it's going to be massive. We know it's going to be big. We know it's going to be inverting what we think about networking as we've thought about networking really in the last like 30 years or so. So I know any sorry if that was a long meandering kind of question there, Dave. Sorry about that. But
Oh no, it's okay.
any thoughts around design, like in how operation teams should be thinking about their design, and how a changing architecture. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that from a standpoint of the traffic patterns, yes, traditional north-south traffic patterns are different in AI architectures. You're going to have a lot more east-west traffic. You're going to have a lot more bursty traffic. I think that the way that you are operating that needs to change as well. Meaning you've got to be able to have tools that can, take in telemetry data, that tools that can interact with each other, whether that's through MCP or whether that's through, API, calls or what have you. I think you got to you have to make sure that that there's not one tool that's going to have everything in it. And so you've got to have these systems talking to each other and understanding each other as agents, just like humans would in looking at things. You've got to have these agents also talking to each other. I also think that, from a design perspective, you've got to be able to also look at your designs. Traditionally with, tooling and network monitoring, what have you, we might be looking at alerts that are coming out. You've got the alert fatigue that happens, or alert overload. You might be looking at, up downs, states, more advanced, et cetera. But you also have to be able to utilize data that maybe you don't inherently have, then to reason upon, and then to make some decisions so you have better context. And that context can change at any given moment. So you need to be able to have live context as to what's happening right now. And also, how does this relate to the design? Is my design in place that I've set? Was there any unintended consequence that took place? I've got to have tools that can reason upon that. When I did this, was there an unintended consequence that actually changed my design? And if it changed my design, what part of the business did it break? How do I get it back? So that kind of reasoning has to happen within your tool sets.
Yeah, that makes sense. Perfect. So I want to kind of close and kind of, well, with kind of an ear towards where we have the AI Networking Summit happening next week. And
Looking forward to it.
one of the, yeah, yeah, thanks, David. So am I. We're looking forward to it as well. A lot of prep, for that. But where we've been focusing on is really kind of a shift from kind of experimentation.
Yeah.
Think about the operation. So kind of experimentation into kind of, operations and into production. So maybe kind of what advice, could you give to others? You've seen this over and over again within the NetBrain customers about, how do you start, like maybe what's kind of low hanging fruit around how do you get started within your operations centers, like with AI, and maybe what are some of like the more advanced, examples that you see right now?
Yeah. So, you know, with our customers, they're very successful in utilizing AI in their operations. What they're doing is they are designing specific solutions in which AI is able to handle that from beginning to end, not starting out just so broad, and not going very deep, but looking at specific solutions. So, whether it has to do with the high frequency things that take place and having that reasoning done, and then taking that reasoning and then applying it for prevention across the rest of the enterprise, and then having a process, right? Sometimes there's like an operational muscle that also needs to be developed in being successful in AI operations. Or sometimes it could be not things that have high frequency, but things that have high impact, and then developing AI solutions beginning to end, so that that is completed, and then just constantly looking at that, and constantly implementing those types of solutions. So that's what we're seeing our customers that are very successful in this. What we're also seeing is that we've got customers that are implementing this AI reasoning right into their everyday workflow for operations. So if there's incidents that come up, whether there's a lot of information or not within those incidents, the AI reasoning begins to look at what the issues are here. What are the solutions? What are the things that have to be true? And if there is, one of the things that we do is we will take all the successful root causes and solutions that have been found, and we'll add that into the what we call our runbooks, and AI will now use that for reasoning going forward. So it's that constant muscle, runbook creation, adding skills, being specific to implementing solutions that are handled by AI, and just adding on that and growing it.
Yeah. Awesome. David, that was great. Thanks so much.
Thanks for the invitation, Nick.
No, you're welcome. I think that's a great stop, but that was really good. It's like you guys have really been in this really from the very beginning, kind of, pre AI, and now you're kind of right into the thick of it, with AI. So that was like really great, just especially kind of like the focus on kind of context and reasoning in particular, and how those contribute to having guardrails being put in place, and what the conditions are for no human in the loop and be both the kind of like tier one, tier two kind of levels within operations and how to start automating those particular tasks. So this was really good. We hit a lot of topics around the operation. So David, thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Awesome. Look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for plugging in. Thanks, David.